Hello there, and welcome back to the Judge Program for Star Wars Unlimited Level 1 Certification Track Lessons. As always, I'm your host Jonah, and today we'll be finishing up Comprehensive Rules Section 8, Additional Rules. This list is a grab bag of rules that aren't necessarily covered in detail elsewhere, but some of them we've already discussed in passing. For those that haven't come up before, we're going to go over them now in detail, but for those that we have, here's a list of lessons where the material comes up. 8.1, which covers aspect penalties, we talked about in L1 Lessons 2, 4, 5, and 8, under sections covering aspects and costs. 8.2, attacks and defeats, we covered in Lesson 8, under End of Combat. 8.3, attributes, we discussed in Lesson 4 during the overview. 8.4, can and can't, we discussed in Lesson 2, under the Golden Rules. 8.6, copy, we discussed in Lesson 4, under names and subtitles. 8.7, empty deck, we discussed in Lesson 3 under Draw a Card. 8.8, enters play, we discussed in Lesson 6 under In Play and Out of Play. 8.13, leaves play, also discussed in Lesson 6 under In Play and Out of Play. 8.16, modifiers, we covered in Lessons 2, 4, and 8 under Costs, and Lessons 3 and 4 under Power and HP. 8.18, name, covered in L1 lesson number 4 are under names. 8.20, we covered in play restrictions in lesson 8 under step 2 of playing a card and using an action ability. 8.21, prevent damage, we covered in lesson 9 under replacement effects. 8.22, printed, we covered in lesson 4 in several places under several different attributes. 8.29, then, lesson 9, covered in general discussion. And 8.30, unique and the unique icon were covered in L1 Lesson 4 under names and subtitles. That's almost half of Section 8, but that still leaves plenty for us to dig into, so let's go. We're going to mostly go in sequence of the comprehensive rules, but some sections fit better together, so we'll jump around just a little bit. 8.5, choose. When a player is instructed to choose, they must choose an object matching a criteria. If it's a unit, unless otherwise specified, the unit must be in play. When choosing a player, it can be either player, including the player resolving the ability. When choosing from a number of options on a bulleted list while resolving an ability, each choice can only be made once. When damage is divided as you choose, the player chooses how much damage is placed on each eligible card up to the number specified. All damage must be assigned, and the ability can deal damage in excess of a card's HP. When a player chooses a number, they can choose any number, including 0. This means that if damage is to be divided among any number of units, a player can choose to deal damage to 0 units. First indicates that you're the first person to comment on this lesson and still have elements of internet culture from 2 decades ago still ingrained in your muscle memory. However, in the game, if an ability is looking for the first occurrence of an event in a phase or round, it is looking for the first instance of that occurrence, not the first instance after the ability becomes active. This is the same for any other ability mentioning a specific number. It's the overall instance of the event occurring, not the number since the card has been played. For example, if you play Omega, part of the squad, and then you play Wrecker, another clone, you won't ignore his aspect penalty, because Omega was the first clone you played, even though Wrecker is the first one you played since Omega's ability became active. 8.10, 8.17, and 8.33. If you do, must, and you may. These 3 sets of rules cover permissions that can affect player actions. Some abilities have the phrase, if you do. In order to resolve the text following it, the controlling player must resolve the preceding text. With Enforced Loyalty, if you don't defeat a friendly unit, you don't draw the card. With Mine and Guild TIE Fighter, if you don't pay the resources, you also don't draw. However, if the condition is met, if you do defeat a friendly unit or you pay the 2 resources, you must complete the if you do effect. Effects that say you may, as seen on Mine Guild TIE Fighter, are optional. You can choose not to complete the conditional effect and consequently not have to resolve the if you do. If a replacement effect replaces a condition, but the player attempted to resolve that effect, the if you do effect still resolves. For example, if you control a Toro Calican and play a Hunter of the Haxion Brood and resolve the shielded trigger first, you can choose to deal the 1 damage to the Hunter, which is prevention by shield. However, the ability condition was met, and you then resolve the if you do effect. Sometimes, an ability will say must. These dictate additional costs or actions that a player has to take. If a must ability contradicts a can, the must ability takes precedence. If a must ability contradicts a can't ability, the can't ability takes precedence. 8.11. Ignore. If a player is instructed to ignore a keyword, they treat that ability as inactive, but the ability is not lost. If a player is instructed to ignore the aspect penalty, the cost is not modified by the aspect penalty. However, the card still has those aspects which may trigger some abilities. All other additional costs and modifiers are still paid for. 8.12. Last known information. This rule covers when defeated abilities. In particular, it makes sure to look at how the unit existed while it was still in play. Otherwise, a lot of abilities won't work. For example, General Krell checks to see if the unit was friendly, but you don't control units when they're in their discard pile, so this ability looks to see how the unit existed while it was in the arena. Similarly, if they printed a card that says, when a Mandalorian is defeated, if you put Foundling on a Wild Rancor, the Wild Rancor being defeated would trigger the ability, even though the Rancor only has the creature trait while in your discard pile. 8.14, 8.26, and 8.27. Look at, reveal, and search. This collection of rules involves how players can view cards from zones they normally do not have access to. If a player is instructed to look at cards, only that player is entitled to see them. They cannot change the order of the cards and must place them back in the same order and orientation unless otherwise specified. If a player is instructed to reveal cards, the attributes of that card or those cards become temporarily open information available to all players. Any revealed cards must be placed back in the same order and orientation unless otherwise specified. If a player is instructed to search their deck, the player looks at the specified number of cards or their entire deck as appropriate, finds cards that meets the requirements, and moves them to the appropriate zone. While resolving a search, if multiple cards have the specified attribute, the player may choose any of those cards or choose no cards as their attributes are hidden information. After a player searches a portion of their deck, they take any cards not chosen and put them on the bottom of their deck in a random order. If they search the whole deck, they simply shuffle the whole deck. For each of these, looking, revealing, and searching, cards have not left the zone they were in unless otherwise specified. If a card loses a keyword, it no longer has that keyword or any abilities that keyword granted. If an effect checks to see if that card has that keyword, it does not. If a card loses all abilities, it ceases to have any abilities, including those printed on it or given to it by other cards or effects, for the duration of the lose effect. If a card attempts to give an ability after a lose effect for that ability occurs, it does not gain those abilities. These three sections are all close to the English dictionary definition of these words. Other, another, or different indicates that a card can't be selected multiple times or that it can't select itself. To randomly select something, players agree on a method that has equal odds of selecting each option and then using that method. To return a card, it is moved to the name zone. It does not have to have ever been in that zone for it to return there. For example, if you discard a Scanning Officer to Cobb Vanth, you play it, and then your opponent plays Waylay on the Scanning Officer, it will still go to your hand despite never having been in that zone this game. 8.24. Referential abilities. Some abilities refer to a card by name, such as the Emperor's Royal Guard. These abilities only check to see if you control a card with that name. This ability isn't checking for card type or subtitle, so Leader Emperor Palpatine, Leader Unit Emperor Palpatine Galactic Ruler, and Unit Emperor Palpatine Master of the Darkside will all qualify for this ability. Some upgrades have additional effects if they're attached to a unit with a particular name. These upgrades can be attached to other units and still apply their power and HP modifiers, but any ability or effect that specifies a particular unit won't resolve. 8.28. Take control. When a player takes control of a card, they, unsurprisingly, become that card's controller and remain so until the card leaves play or another effect changes the controller of the card. A card that changes control maintains its ready and exhausted status, all damage remains on it, and all cards attached to it remain, but do not change control. That means taking control of a unit means it will still have all of its upgrades attached to it, but you won't gain control of those upgrades. If a unit changes control during an attack, it is no longer part of the attack, and no longer an attacker or defender. 8.31 and 8.35. Up to and for each. When resolving an ability with up to X, the player selects a whole number between 0 and X, inclusive of both those values. If a player selects 0, they have resolved the ability, but they are not considered to have defeated any cards, dealt or healed any damage, or made any attacks as appropriate. Abilities that resolve multiple effects with for each are handled by determining how each effect of the ability will be resolved, and then resolving all effects simultaneously. 8.32. U. The word U, an ability or effect, refers to the controller of that ability or effect. If an ability or effect refers to when you do something, such as deal damage or attack, it refers to any cards you control or abilities you resolve. 8.34 Capture. Capture comes with a whole lot of rules baggage. When you capture a card, remove all damage from it and defeat all upgrades on it, then place it face down under the capturing unit. It is considered out of play, but its attributes are still public information. A unit that has captured one or more cards is guarding those units. When a player is instructed to rescue a captured card, that card is flipped face up and returned to play exhausted under its owner's control. It does enter play, but is not played, and consequently does not trigger any when played abilities. If a unit that is guarding one or more cards leaves play, either by being defeated, being captured itself, or otherwise, immediately rescue all units it was guarding. 8.36 Indirect Damage. As of Jump to Lightspeed, there are some abilities that instruct a player to deal indirect damage to another player. Rather than assigning the damage themselves, the chosen player assigns X unpreventable damage divided as they choose among bases and units they control. When doing this, a player cannot exceed the remaining HP value on units. So, unfortunately, you cannot assign all the indirect damage you would receive to that 1 HP Jar Jar that you have in play. Since this damage is unpreventable, that means it bypasses shields and is assigned on units without having any shields removed if they have any. Even though the player with the ability isn't choosing where the damage goes, they are still considered to have dealt the damage, and likewise, a unit whose ability deals indirect damage is considered to have dealt that damage. Regardless of how the damage is spread out among bases and units, all the indirect damage is considered to be dealt simultaneously as one instance of damage. 8.37 Move. This one's pretty straightforward. If a unit is instructed to move arenas, like with Blue Leader, Scarefare supports when played ability, that unit is moved to the other arena. It will retain its status of exhausted or readied after the move and keep all upgrades attached and damage assigned to it. After it's moved, it's considered to only be a unit of the arena it's in, so Blue Leader would stop being a space unit and become a ground unit. This would also mean that Blue Leader would lose the ability to attack units in space after it's moved, unless given the ability by another card. 8.38 The Force. This is one of the main mechanics introduced in the set Legends of the Force. The Force itself is a token without any secondary type that exists in the base zone and is created by effects that say, "The Force is with you." A player can't have more than one the Force token at a time, but can spend theirs for abilities that instruct them to use the Force, causing the token to be defeated. Some abilities will also check to see if you have the Force token. If it does, then it will use the phrase, "if the Force is with you," and the effects following that statement will be granted. Okay, that's the rules. We do have one more lesson with the comprehensive rules where we'll cover the various formats players can play, but this is it. We've covered the key rules for Premier Play. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or insights, be sure to join the Judge Community Discord and make your voice heard. Until next time, good luck and have fun.